All right, thank you so much for staying with us. Well, a wave of transformation really sweeping through Nigeria's oil and gas industry. Now, the leadership of Mr. Bayo Ojulari, who's the newly appointed Group Chief Executive Officer of the NNPCL Limited, since taking terms of office in April 2025, he has seen sweeping reforms aimed at restoring transparency, boosting oil production, and repositioning the national oil company for global competitiveness. He has launched initiatives targeting some of the sector's most persistent challenges, improved collaboration with upstream partners, and enhanced security measures along pipelines, which played a key role in raising daily crude output from 1.2 to about 1.8 million barrels per day as at August 2025, that's this month. But let's talk to Dr. Chinan Dikwal, who's the Vice Chair, Africa Energy Council. He joins me from Doha. It's good to see you, Dr. Dikwal. Always nice having you on the program.
Hi, Tolu. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
First, I'm going to ask you, I'm sure you read in the news the back and forth with regards to either resignation or no resignation. But my question really is, what message does this send to Nigeria's struggling oil and gas industry? Because I call it a struggling industry because we still face myriads of challenges around that space.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's the right question you're asking there. I've listened to this debate as well over the last week, and I think the focus that many people, many commentators have sort of given their attention to has been largely around the political dimension of this. Did it happen? Did it not? You know, and all of that back and forth. But if you ask me, none of those is really important. I think we're missing the point here. And the point is really your question. What's the implication of this? And that's where I'm going to focus. So just to put this out, just to be very clear, Bayo Ojulari came in April of this year, appointed by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. He was not the only one. We had a massive team, a star-studded team, the A-team of the Nigerian oil and gas industry. Austin Avurus, greatly experienced, and several people, Mr. Kida on there, and several people who are extremely experienced. So that gave a lot of confidence into the Nigerian oil and gas industry. But what's happened in the last week has really, I think that's where to start. The first thing is it's really dented market confidence. And I would say this, the confidence that many people had in that appointment is starting to come into question. That here you have somebody who has just been appointed, 3-4 months ago and is getting the job done. And unfortunately, we're starting to have situations where his position is shaky. So from a market confidence standpoint, there are huge issues. But also think about this, Tolu. The NNPCL is just about to IPO. Bayo Ojulari just laid out the plan for IPO. IPO meaning the initial public offering of the organization. Right now, it's an organization owned by the Nigerian state, but by 2028, which is the plan, it will become a public organization floated maybe in London or New York, or wherever it is. So there's a huge angle there that a lot of the investors who are sat on the sidelines and are waiting for them to put capital into NNPC will start to get cold feet. Here you've got an executive who has just come in, and all of a sudden there are rumors that he's being arrested and he's being forced to resign. Now, whether or not that is true or not, that's not the point. The point is that you have the chief executive going through this kind of rumors, and that dents market confidence. That's number one. Number two is also a reputational one. You know, the NNPC has had lots of challenges in the past. With this new appointment of the new board, we're hoping that they will turn over a new leaf. Unfortunately, they're being tainted by these problems again, which I think is a big thing. Now, the other thing to think about as well is, even if this is untrue, just the perception that the CEO of an oil company can be trapped in by the anti-corruption agency, for lack of better words, saying the government. That sort of conflict would not give a lot of confidence for investors. So I think these are the things that are really disturbing, if you ask me. But I'll say this very quickly, I know I'm taking a bit of time. For Bayo Ojulari and his team, there are several things they need to do very quickly. Because the reality of it is, in the context of the IPO, this is a real biggie. Many investors will start to have cold feet. The valuation that we thought would get for NNPCL, so how much it'll be valued, maybe we'll take a hit right now. Is it 10%? Is it 15%? Is it 20% hit? We don't know. They need to do a few things very quickly right now to save that situation. The first thing I would say is they need to launch a very proactive campaign, maybe the NNPC board should issue a very strongly worded statement with the EFCC chairman to say, you know what, this did not happen and all of that. Because what you do not want is that this rumor crystallizes into a market fact. Once it becomes a market fact, I can tell you there's a penalty, there's a dollar value penalty in terms of valuation. So I think these are the key things. They need to have very clear structure, lead a campaign, some sort of a proactive, campaign to put out the real story out there. They need to demonstrate strong governance to show independence. If you ask me, I would say they need to start to put out very quickly, some press releases around, the independence mechanisms that they have. So things like their audit committees, they need to highlight that very clearly. Their board risk committees, independent directors, all of these things they need to put out to start to give investors confidence that this organization has a bit of independence and does not have state interference. So I think these are a couple of things that I would say to the organization at a very short term.
Indeed, while you say that, I'm just going to add that, for the fact that there is no official spokesperson for the NNPCL at this time, which is not also very good. Since when Mr. Femi Shone resigned from that position, no one is taking that, or no one has been appointed to take charge of that position. So no one even knows who to relate with directly or not directly. But let's talk about the refineries, which in recent times, Mr. Juari was quoted to have said here they were not going to sell off the Port Harcourt refinery, that they were still going to rehabilitate. But my question and my worry really is, after $1.5 billion doled out by the AFDB to revamp that refinery in totality, what sort of rehabilitation are we looking at again? If it's not going to be productive, why not just take the bold step?
So that's a great question you asked, and I'm going to give my thoughts, but I'd say this, the reality of it is, for a board that's just come in, like, Mr. Bayo Ojulari has just come in with his team, they are looking across the entire assets of NNPC, and they are rationalizing to see which assets bear value and which ones are underperforming. Now, naturally, if an asset is underperforming, you need to come up with a strategy of how to turn it to a performing asset. Now, when I say that, a performing asset could be the fact that you divest that asset. So I think that was the initial thought, that Bayo Ojulari and his team sat down and said, okay, the refineries may be let off. But after some evaluation, it does appear that they've singled out the Port Harcourt refinery and said that they would hold on to that. They haven't said anything about Kaduna or Warri, but certainly the Port Harcourt refinery. Quite frankly, I would say this: we don't have all the facts as to why they are holding on to the Port Harcourt refinery. And bear in mind, this refinery is extremely old. I can't remember, I think it's 1965, something of that sort. I cannot remember. So it's extremely old. A lot of the units there are extremely obsolete, without a doubt. Even the some of the key refining systems in there, are unable they're unable to produce PMS. So many of them produce lesser products, as far as I know. But he's making that strategic decision, I think, for several reasons. This is my take to it. One, Port Harcourt is a very strategic area when it comes to oil and gas operations in Nigeria. A huge amount of crude oil, all the terminals and all of that. So of course, access to that refinery makes sense. But I think overarchingly, they are looking at what Mr. Dangote is doing. He's absolutely charging in and taking over the market. There are questions there, from an energy security standpoint, saying, shall we outsource the whole energy security of Nigeria into private hands, or shall we hold back some of those? I think a lot of these discussions are what are going on. And it could be the fact that they would have a strategy in how to turn that around. But honestly, if you ask me, $1.5 billion has been a lot of money. And it's not the only one. In total, it was about $2.9 billion, so just for context, between Kaduna Refinery, Warri Refinery, and Port Harcourt, was about $2.9 billion that was spent in total. And still, we've not seen anything turn around. Many people do not have confidence that that will be the case. But I think, for the benefit of the doubt, and it's a new team, maybe there are certain things that they are thinking about. So I will give the benefit of the doubt for now. But without a doubt, I think they are being pushed on very aggressively by the liberalization of the market and what Dangote is doing. And I think that's a great thing. He's putting them on their toes, and they would have to come up with really good ideas on how to turn that around.
That's a lot of money that should turn something around. $2.9 billion, Dr. Chinan. That's a lot. Well, let's move to look at production, which is actually improved. I'm excited really about that, I must say. I had the NUPRC at the SPE conference confirming to the fact that they've hit 1.8 million barrels per day. That to me is a good one. And if you remember, chairman of Harris Holding, who's also chairman of UBA, Mr. Tony Lumelu, also said it during the meeting with the president, saying they used to have so much of loss with regards to crude theft and all of that. But now he says they are able to gather 98% of production, which seems to be a good one. How does that come to you, and what are the prospects of this increase in production for you, particularly at this time when we talk about revenue for Nigeria?
Absolutely. So I'll say this. As a state, as a Nigerian state, there are many things in our country that are not going right, I've got to say. But one thing I can tell you that's going right, without a doubt, is the energy sector. In the last 2 years, we've seen the biggest shift in the energy sector that we have ever seen. I can certainly say that for a fact. I've been in this industry for the last, sort of 17, 18 years, and it's probably the biggest movement that we have seen since about, I'd say probably since about 2013, 2014. Okay, oil production, like you mentioned there, has gone up very significantly, 1.8 million barrels. But I'll be clear, when we say 1.8 million barrels, just to be very clear about that, it's about 1.5 million barrels of crude oil and about 250 of condensate. So just to be clear about that.
Yeah.
So without a doubt. So oil production has gone up pretty high, which is absolutely exciting. That means ultimately that our revenue, would increase massively. The deficit, the budget deficit that we have right now is closing a little bit, just for context. Our budget is based on $75 oil, 202.06 million of volume of production per day. So there's a bit of a deficit there. But without a doubt, the increase in production means that we're closing out that deficit. So that's really, really exciting, without a doubt. But I think even more exciting, Tolu, to say is there are several fields that are set to come online soon. At the end of this year, our target for Nigeria is 2 million barrels for the end of this year. That's as far as I know that the NUPRC has set. I think 2 million barrels for the end of this year. And there's several fields that are lining up for them to come on stream very quickly. Several FIDs that are just going to be taken. Owowo, which is ExxonMobil. Obviously, Bonga North has just been sanctioned. Zaba Zaba, so just close to Etan, the Etan field. There's several fields that have are just about to FID. So, and many of these things are not coincidence, just to put it out there. Many of these FIDs we're seeing are not coincidence. The FIDs are happening because of the executive orders that we've seen signed in the last 2 years. We've had 3 executive orders signed. We've had the cost efficiency executive order. We've had tax incentives. All of these ones are giving market confidence to investors to put money in their pocket and FID. And a lot of that is what's translating to the increase in production that you're seeing. But to your point as well, crude oil theft has gone down significantly. Operation Delta Sanity. So there have been 2 operations that were launched in the last couple of years. Operation Delta Sanity, that has been wildly successful. A lot of the barrels, from the wellhead, going through our pipelines, many of them are being delivered all the way into the terminals with very little theft. And I think that's extremely exciting because they're using, technology. So it's a combination of technology, but also surveillance and oversight. And that's been wildly successful. So I'll make this, I don't want to say a prediction, but I would say this. For the first time ever, we are having confidence that Nigeria can actually hit that $2 million barrel per day production. We're 1.8 today. We're about 200,000 barrels short. Given the momentum and what I can see, I think there's a huge chance that we can hit that 2 million barrels per day production. I'm not sure if it's going to be at the end of this year, but certainly I think from the look of things, around 2026, maybe end of 2026, I'm beyond confident that we can hit 2 million barrels of crude oil per day. Now, if we do that, then it's huge news for Wale Edun talking about revenue. It is huge news for him because the deficit that we have would close. The revenues we have will go up significantly. In fact, you know this so well, Tolu. For the first time in a long time, Nigeria is operating a budget surplus, not a budget deficit. Sorry, I apologize. A trade surplus, not a trade deficit.
Not a trade deficit,
for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. And much of that is happening because we're having a lot more volumes of crude oil to export and very little to import.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, indeed, that's one thing. But let me ask you, many say with the PIA, there seems to be a bit of pushback with the enactment, even at the NNPC level and, of course, with players in the industry. I don't know what you see around that space. Are we following this document? To the latter, I've always asked this question when I have opportunities to speak with industry experts like you. It seems to be like there's some pushbacks. What is happening?
Yeah, so I'll make this point. There are huge pushbacks in terms of the PIA. I see this in several situations, particularly some of the very contentious segments of it. The document is very robust. There's no question about that. I think the implementation of it still has a lot of work to be done. And some of that, I'll be quite frank with you, is what we're seeing within the NNPC. The functionalization and getting some of this done. I know Mr. Bayo Ojulari has been a big advocate of this, and he's having a lot of pushback. I'm just being very frank. I'm an industry insider. We see this all the time. There are huge pushbacks, particularly upstream, some downstream, but I think particularly upstream, we're seeing a huge amount of pushbacks. But you know how these things work. Even if you go to, let's say we go to the Santos Basin in Brazil or the pre-salt basin, which has been wildly productive, they had exactly the same issues. When they started their reform, there was a huge amount of pushback, but with steady pressure and consistent application, they have been able to turn it around. The same in Malaysia. We've seen several examples where you'd have a document that's nice and great, but unfortunately, you have industry insiders who continue to become a clog to it. So I don't think all hope is lost. I think there's a huge possibility that we can surmount this. But I would make this point as well that, just to be clear, the PIA is great. But honestly, what to think about as Nigerians is, how does the PIA, how do our fiscal terms compare to the fiscal terms in Angola? How do our fiscal terms compare to the fiscal terms in Namibia? How do our fiscal terms compare to the fiscal terms in the MSGBC basin? Mauritania and Senegal? That is the big question. It's not really functionalizing. So let me give an example. Let's say we have this PIA, yes, and it says our government take is, I'm just making this up now, say it's 10% government take or royalty, our royalty rate is 10%. If it says that, but then you go to the MSGBC basin and you're having a lower government take, all of a sudden they will be a lot more attractive than Nigeria. So I still think the PIA is great. But honestly, it should be a living document. We should continue to iterate that. And if you ask me right now, honestly, there are certain African countries that are still much more attractive for investment. When you look at it, if I'm going to put, $5 million into a certain sector today, and I look at the fiscal terms, some countries look far more attractive than Nigeria still, even with the new PIA that we have. So I think that document needs to become a living document, and we should try to iterate as much as possible. And that iteration, I've got to say, is what you are seeing with the executive orders. So we've had 3 executive orders that are targeting specifics of the PIA, and those specifics are what are unlocking some of the FIDs that we are seeing.
Finally, before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your Friday, ending fuel imports is one move that I think Nigerian government will be excited about. Myself and you, we've had this conversation around Dangote refinery and the positive it brings to the fore. But do you see Nigeria, 2 questions, maybe being a major player in the refining space, and of course getting to that point where we would maybe to a level stop importation?
Yeah, I think, so I'll answer the question twofold. To be very, very clear, Tolu, I think a lot of the signs, a lot of the cards are aligning that way. And I'll give an example. Just last week, there was a big announcement in the UK, one of the biggest refineries, again, is closing. That will be the 3rd refinery in the UK that just closed in the last couple of years. And when I say refineries, bear in mind, a lot of the refined products ends up back in Africa, okay? So just because of the new refinery we have, Dangote, in Lekki, and servicing that market, a lot of the refineries in Europe are now becoming uncompetitive and they're closing out. I'm just talking the UK now. There have been several in Greece, there have been several around Europe, refineries that were servicing us, the West African continent, that are going bust. They are going bankrupt because they cannot compete again. We have a new refinery here that's servicing that market. So to your point, with importation stop, I think largely that should stop from all the market signs that we see. Of course, there are huge oppositions. Of course, there are things that we need to look at before that happens. Because bear in mind, when you say importation should stop, there's a big question. There have been players who have made huge investments in the importation value chain. Okay, you have people who exactly. So you have all of those things. So government would have to look at that in a way that makes sense. Those investments cannot simply just be turned off. We perhaps need to think about a time frame to make that happen so that we can still retain value here. But I am beyond convinced that from what we can see, the signs that we can see, the volumes that are coming in, I think the only downside, if you ask me, the only downside we have today is the fact that when you look at the domestic crude supply obligation that goes to Dangote, it's still way below par. So the amount of crude he requires, I can't remember, I think something like 30%, less than 30% of his capacity, 650,000 barrels per day capacity. I think less than 30% of that, is what he gets from Nigeria. He has to import WTI and others coming in. Now, if Nigeria is able to increase production, so going back to our discussion there, Tolu, if we're able to increase production all the way up to 2 million barrels per day or above that, then potentially that frees up a huge amount of crude that can, again, be fed into the refinery. But of course, you can imagine it's a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah, it is.
Why is it a chicken and egg situation? Because Dangote is taking all of that in Naira. That crude, if we sold it in the international market, it will be valuable foreign exchange that we can use for our economy as well. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg, but I think the solution there is to increase production. If Nigeria is able to increase production beyond 2 million barrels per day, it would solve a lot of the issues that we have today.
Dr. Chinan Dikwa, Vice Chair, Africa Energy Council, thank you so much for your time on the program. This is well appreciated.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, then. Cheers. All right, some foreign stories. Latest report from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization.